I've been interviewing people for ages, but I have never spoken to someone who does what you do, Mick. So, Mick Gordon, composer of Doom Eternal's entire soundscapes. Before we get into all of that sort of thing, though, what was your entry point to writing and composing music? Like, were you in bands and things like that before entering that kind of realm?
Not really, man. I kind of, got into it pretty young. So I left high school and I was playing in cover bands and teaching guitar and stuff just to kind of make a living. And I really wanted to write music, but I wasn't quite good enough to get into like film or television. And that's a pretty difficult industry to break into down here in Australia anyway. But what was down here in Australia was 40 video game companies. And at that time, there was really not many people here that were doing sound and music for video games. So for me, it was like this kind of open market staring me in the face. It was right place, right time sort of stuff. So I started like burning CDs and, making tunes and stuff like that and sending it out to game developers. And to my surprise, they started calling me back. For them, I think it was just a convenience thing. They were able to work with me directly here in Australia rather than going overseas. And I was kind of started doing that when I was about 17, 18, pretty young. So that was kind of my intro into it all.
And so, like, when I look at your credits, you've also done Killer Instinct and Wolfenstein. Like, has your entry point and your work within video gaming always been on the gnarlier end of games?
When I started, I just took whatever job I could get. And my first couple of jobs were like Nickelodeon games, like SpongeBob SquarePants and Jimmy Neutron and Danny Phantom and stuff like that. But it was great, man, because you kind of, you don't grow up playing guitar to do that sort of stuff. So you have to learn that sort of thing on the spot. And writing music for like a Nickelodeon franchise is a whole different ballgame. It's got its own set of challenges, So I kind of started there. It wasn't until sort of after a few years I started getting my teeth into some of the more aggressive stuff.
So, which brings us quite neatly to Doom. I wondered, at what point do they bring you in to start building soundscapes? Like, are you there from the very beginning, or do they start developing the game and sending you ideas? Like, when do you enter the process of this?
Well, each project's different, as you can imagine, but typically I like to be brought in pretty early. And at that stage, like, there is really no game. There might be some sort of temp game where it's like a gray boxed world with, triangles and rectangles and squares, and your character can kind of jump up and down, and one of these squares might be moving and you can kind of shoot something at it. And it's like, it's really, really early stuff. It's nothing that sort of represents a video game. But what they do have at that time is concept artists. And the concept artists are working really, really hard to try and define the look of the game. And getting that stuff, man, especially on a project like Doom, every single piece of concept art is like a 70s, metal album cover. And that's the stuff that I find is the most inspiring, because I'm able to kind of get in early on that sort of initial creativity train. And then you're able to really like develop the musical sound alongside the game. So I like to get in nice and early. It doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes you come in super late and it's all like all hands on deck just to try to get the thing out the door. But I like to get in pretty early.
And something that really stands out about the massive amount of music that you created for Doom Eternal and Doom is it feels like even when there's nothing in the way of like more traditional metal soundscapes, everything is built with sinister and evil in mind. Like, there isn't a lot of space for fragility and sort of overall niceness here. Do you have much in the way of like a growing up love for metal? Because it really, if you don't, I'll be astounded given how grisly and grim like the music is for Doom.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things to that. Yes, of course. Like, my first introductions to music was more like, blues and Stevie Ray Vaughan and Jimi Hendrix and all that sort of thing. But, thinking of that stuff at the time, like Hendrix and Cream during the 60s, like that was the early heavy metal there, right? So then going into Black Sabbath and then going in further and further until you get, more and more sinister stuff that was happening in the 80s and 90s and sort of thing. So, metal's always been there. But when on a video game project, you talk more about feelings than you do about genres. And with something like Doom, it's all about sonic aggression. So it's this sort of loud, abrasive, angry, fast-paced, high-fidelity type of sound. And that's what the game needs, and that's what the game represents. So the music is kind of informed by that. And sometimes the best way to get that is with 9-string guitars and double kick drums and, you know, super, super speed stuff, angry stuff. Sometimes it's you get there through synthesizers and running synths from, you know, the early 80s Soviet sort of period through like crazy effects pedal chains and things like that, whatever it is. Anything to make like a really aggressive or, as you said, like sinister sound. So we talk more about feelings than we do genres, yeah.
Okay, so I guess what I wanted to ask is, were there any particular bands that stand out as far as bands that influenced your writing for Doom? Like, I was listening to, let me just make sure I get the song title right. It's Soul Extraction, had a guitar tone that had that almost Meshuggah style elastic feel to it. I wondered if there were any particular bands that you would cite as influences for the Doom Eternal soundtrack.
I kind of love everything, man. What's interesting is, like, I think the same things that inspires a game like Doom also inspires a lot of metal bands, right? So it's aggression, it's satanic themes, it's power fantasy, it's violence, all this sort of stuff also, you know, inspires lots of different metal bands. So I love that sort of stuff as well. For the, you know, it's interesting you mentioned Meshuggah. I've you know, known Frederick from Meshuggah for quite a while, and I love that guy so much. He's such a really creative, interesting musician, and he got to come on board with us for a couple of Wolfenstein tracks, which was a lot of fun as well. So I think more it's like we're all just in a really similar headspace, you know. Yeah, so I guess that's the thing, man. Yeah.
It's interesting when you say satanic themes, like, because there's so many different ways of taking that, because that can be anything from, like, I was watching The Wicker Man last night, the original Wicker Man, and all the kind of folk music from that has a kind of almost satanic feel, to guttural heavy metal. What are there any kind of visual cues that you take for the music? So I'll give you an example. Right, in WWE, there's a guy called Jim Johnson, right? And he writes the theme music for people that come out, right? So 7 foot Big Show, kind of lumbering. His music is blues orientated, dum 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 dum, because he moves like that. So do you have to get inspiration like that for things like that one-eyed fucker in Doom?
Yeah, of course, man, absolutely. When I'm working on a project, they're always sending me videos or concept art like we were talking about before. And you got to kind of numb your brain a little bit and just sort of imagine yourself in that video game already and try and sort of envision what sounds might be the most appropriate. And it's weird, like when you really tap into it, you feel more like a musical archaeologist. It's almost like the musical's already there. It just becomes your job to kind of uncover it, you know, and you'll find this tone that works really well, or this tempo that works really well, or this key that works really well. And then over time, you start to build this picture of what the music's going to sound like. Sometimes that comes from the visuals, but another big part of video games is obviously the interactive nature of it. So you're playing through these hellscapes, you know, these satanic imagery is something that's coming alive and you're playing through it. So there's that engagement level as well. And all of these things are feeding back into the music.
When you talk about the colouring of tones and things like that, something that fascinates me particularly about your Doom soundtrack is I am really into the ASMR style feel of where heavy music is going. There's a band that we've featured quite prominently called Code Orange, who have featured that within their heaviness. Do you think that that's something that can make heavy music have a more mainstream relevancy? Because it feels like that type of music and like our type of music and where technology is for audio are kind of natural bedfellows. If you want sonic aggression and to be punished from various different points on the ear, it feels like like metal might go in that direction. As someone that deals with sound and loads of those elements because it has an interactive nature, do you think that's a fair point?
Man, it's such a good point. And interestingly, music has always been inspired by technology, and whatever is current technology and future technologies is going to change music again. So whatever stuff is on the horizon will definitely influence the way we can do things. There's all sorts of stuff we can do nowadays with bass frequencies and sub frequencies and things, and that's really influenced the way its way into to metal music as well, right? Be a lot more accurate now with computer-based editing and things, and that is, almost bred whole genres and different changes and things. It's an art form, so it's always going to have people that are going to react against that stuff too. And I'm loving, bands that want to go in and record completely analog, straight to tape, bounce it off to vinyl, and that goes out to a small fan base, that sort of thing as well. So, but yeah, with regards to like ASMR or this sort of thing, I don't know. Like for me, an interesting one again with the video game things is that the video game itself is almost the vessel that new audiences can be introduced to different styles of music. And so there might be people out there that really love a good first-person shooter, and they'll play something like Doom, and it gives us an opportunity to kind of insert certain metal-type sounds into their lives, and that's quite an interesting thing too. I think these days, if you want any sort of leg up in the music industry, you've really got to find some sort of cultural attachment, and for me, with video games, that's become that. I've been able to be very fortunate to be part of this like big cultural explosion called video games, and the music sort of rides along with that, So yeah, man, of course, it's always been hand in hand with the technology that's around.
And like, I won't keep much more of your time because I know you're super busy at the moment. The actual experience of recording the Doom soundtrack, because there's video footage of, like loads and loads of people involved. Can you tell us how you involved other musicians from the world of metal and the actual experience of recording it all? Because it looked both complex and fun.
Yeah, man. Originally, there was this idea when we started Doom Eternal that we wanted this chant, right? There was going to be these ancient sections of the game, and we thought it'd be really cool if there was like a crowd in this like gladiator coliseum that were chanting, right, while you're kind of fighting these demons in the middle of this coliseum. And I'm always trying to find like, that little bit further, like how much further can we push it? What else can we do? What's a little bit interesting that maybe hasn't been done before or whatever? And we thought, what would be more appropriate to Doom than having the chant screamed and shouted by a choir of heavy metal screamers? And once we hit onto that idea, it's like, oh man, this is great. That's really going to influence the way the soundtrack is going to sound. If we have 4 hours in this recording space with, 24 metal screamers, that's unique. I haven't experienced that in a video game before. So I put out this open call, and I gathered a whole bunch of different metal singers into this space in Austin in Texas. Then we had some awesome people there. We had Sven from Aborted. We had Tony Campos from Fear Factory Ministry and Static X, obviously. So many amazing people turned up for this thing, and it was such an incredible thing, man. I think like that's probably my favorite memory from Doom Eternal is that one day of recording there. But yeah, I mean, that's like, again, with video games, man, you're just allowed to kind of, with the right project, of course, experience and experiment with these sorts of things and create something that's a little bit more unique and interesting at the end of the day, which is really the ultimate goal there.
And last question, what's next, Mick? What are you working on at the moment? Anything exciting?
Yeah, man, I've just got some production stuff for bands that I've been doing this week. Actually, I think that track comes out this week, but I won't say anything about that just yet. But yeah, so some of that stuff, man. I'm doing a horror game next, which is going to be really, really cool. Yeah, man, I mean, there's always lots of little things. I'm really into like lots of different creative projects at the moment. So that's the thing we're doing, yeah.
Well, I'll get back in contact when you've got your horror game and it's out and all the rest of it. Come back and talk to us anytime, Mick. The soundtrack absolutely slams, man. Like, I can feel the fillings in my teeth rattling as I'm playing the game. Brilliant stuff, Mick. Thank you, mate.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you so much.